In the heart of Styria, within the confines of a picturesque and solitary castle, lies a tale of mystery and darkness that defies the conventions of its time. Before Dracula, there was Carmilla, a Gothic novella penned by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. Meet the inhabitants of this remote castle. Laura, a young 19-year-old girl, her aging English father who retired from the Austrian service, and two governesses, Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine. Their lives are marked by solitude, surrounded by a vast forest and the ruins of the Karnstein family chateau. Inside these walls, linguistic diversity reigns, creating an intriguing tapestry of languages, but it's the memories of Laura's past that cast a haunting shadow. Laura awoke one night to find the nursery maid missing and thought she was alone. However, she discovered a young lady with a solemn but pretty face kneeling beside her bed. The lady comforted her and Laura fell back asleep, but she was later awoken by a sharp pain on her chest, and the lady, with a fearful look, seemed to hide under the bed. She cries out and the household staff rushes in. They examine the room but find nothing unusual and dismiss it as a nightmare. However, she insists that the lady was real. A doctor is called and he prescribes medicine for her. She remains scared and refuses to be alone. Her father tries to comfort her but fails. Laura vividly recalls the kind old man in a black cassock who prayed with her in a room filled with ancient furniture and dim light. She forgets much of her life before and after this event, but these scenes remain clear in her memory, like isolated pictures in the midst of darkness. Laura's father reads a letter and informs her that General Spielsdorf's visit, along with his niece, Mademoiselle Bertha Reinfeldt, has been delayed until autumn. However, as he reads the letter, he reveals that Mademoiselle Reinfeldt is deceased. The news shocks and saddens Laura, as she had been looking forward to meeting this young lady. Her father hands her the letter and she realizes that the general was in great distress and something unusual and disturbing must have occurred. The letter is filled with intense emotions and contradictions, and it seems that grief may have affected the general's mental state. The letter reveals that he expresses deep regret for not realizing the danger his niece was in sooner, and blames the fiend who betrayed their trust. He vowed to seek justice and retribution for his niece's suffering, although he currently lacks concrete leads. Laura is moved by the letter and saddened by the loss of Bertha, even though she had never met her. As the sun sets, Laura and her father discuss the letter's meaning while walking towards the road near the castle. The road disappears into the forest on the left, while on the right, a bridge leads to an eminence covered with trees and ivy-clad rocks. A faint mist adds to the picturesque atmosphere, and the moonlight casts a magical glow over the landscape. They encounter Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, who are enjoying the moonlight. The governesses engage in romantic and mystical discussions about the moon's influence. They mention how the moonlight can affect dreams, cause madness, and even change physical appearance, sharing anecdotes to illustrate their points. Mademoiselle de la Fontaine remarks on the moon's idyllic and magnetic power, and the group appreciates the beauty of the moonlit castle in the background. Laura and her father discuss their melancholic mood, and her father quotes Shakespeare. They are interrupted by the sound of approaching carriage wheels and hooves. A carriage with 4 horses and 2 horsemen emerges from the high ground near the bridge. Suddenly, one of the horses gets spooked, causing the entire team to gallop uncontrollably. A female voice inside the carriage screams in terror. Everyone watches in horror as the carriage hurtles towards them at a dangerous speed. Just before reaching the castle drawbridge, the horses veer off course and collide with a magnificent lime tree, causing the carriage to overturn. 2 horses are down, and the carriage lies on its side. The men are trying to free the horses from their traces, while a commanding lady with clasped hands stands beside the wreck, occasionally wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. A young lady is lifted from the carriage, appearing to be lifeless, but Laura's father assures her mother that she is still alive based on her faint pulse. The lady is grateful and theatrical in her emotions, expressing the urgency of her journey. Laura, eager to help, suggests to her father that they ask the lady to let her daughter stay with them. The father proposes this to the lady, offering to take care of her daughter until her return, providing comfort and care in their home. The lady initially hesitates, but is eventually persuaded by the father's kind offer, understanding that it's the best option for her daughter's well-being given the circumstances. As the carriage is set upright and the horses are put back into their positions, the lady beckons to the father and engages in a private conversation with him. Her countenance noticeably changed into a stern one, a change from her previous amicable demeanor. Laura is curious about this sudden shift, but observes that her father doesn't seem to notice it. The lady then returns to her daughter, whispers a benediction, and kisses her cheek hastily. She quickly enters her carriage, and the vehicle departs at a rapid pace, followed closely by the two horsemen. She is slender, graceful, and above average height. She has a rich and vibrant complexion, small and beautifully formed features, large, dark, lustrous eyes, and magnificent, long, dark brown hair that Laura admires. The stranger maintains a high level of secrecy regarding her personal life, history, and family, which frustrates Laura's curiosity. She wonders why she won't confide in her and feels that her questions are met with a cold, persistent refusal to share any information. Despite Laura's insistence and assurances of discretion, the stranger remains tight-lipped. The only few information Laura manages to extract from the stranger were vague. Her name is Carmilla, She comes from an ancient and noble family. Her home is in the West, but she doesn't disclose any further details about her family name, coat of arms, estate, or the country she resides in. Laura did not constantly pester Carmilla for information about her background, but rather subtly tried to learn more. Her inquiries, whether direct or indirect, always failed. Carmilla evaded questions with a melancholic tone, expressed affection for Laura, and made promises to reveal everything eventually. She would embrace Laura, speak passionately, and reassure her that her intentions were not cruel, even though her actions often left Laura in a state of confusion and attraction. Laura found Carmilla's behavior and words unintelligible. Even though she occasionally wanted to break free from her embraces, she felt her energies failing, and Carmilla's murmurs seemed to lull her into a trance. During these mysterious moments, Laura experienced a strange mix of pleasure, fear, and disgust, with love and adoration growing alongside abhorrence. Carmilla would exhibit intense, lover-like affection at times, holding her hand with fervent pressure, blushing, gazing into her eyes with passion, and whispering declarations of ownership and eternal unity. These displays of ardor both embarrassed and overwhelmed Laura. Despite her pleas for Carmilla to stop, the behavior continued intermittently. Laura struggled to explain these extraordinary manifestations and considered various theories, such as episodes of insanity or a romantic disguise. She could not attribute Carmilla's behavior to affection or trickery. While there were moments of intense emotion, there were also long periods of commonplace and melancholy. Carmilla's habits were peculiar, such as coming down late in the day, taking only chocolate for dinner but no food, and easily tiring during walks. Her languor seemed at odds with her animated conversation. She occasionally mentions her homeland, hinting at strange customs and manners, indicating that her native country was more distant and exotic than initially thought. While sitting under the trees one afternoon, Laura and Carmilla witnessed a funeral procession for a young girl, the daughter of one of the forest rangers. The girl's father was heartbroken, and peasants walked behind the coffin singing a funeral hymn. Laura rose to show respect and joined in the hymn, but Carmilla abruptly stopped her, finding the hymn discordant and expressing dislike for funerals. She questioned Laura's disregard of respecting different religions and seemed indifferent to the girl's death. Laura explained that the girl had died after claiming to have seen a ghost 2 weeks earlier. She also mentioned another recent death in the village, speculating about the possibility of a plague or a fever. Carmilla grew increasingly nervous about the discussion and urged Laura to sit close, holding her hand tightly. Carmilla's demeanor changes dramatically as they witness the funeral procession get closer. Her face darkens, and she exhibits signs of distress, clenching her teeth and hands, frowning and trembling. She appears to be suppressing a fit of hysteria, which eventually subsides. She attributes it to the somber hymn and asks to be held to calm herself. This incident is the first time Laura observes any distinct signs of Carmilla's delicate health or temper. It is also the first instance of her displaying anger, though it quickly passes. Later, while looking out of a window with Laura, they spot a hunchbacked wanderer entering the courtyard with a strange assortment of items, including a magic lantern, bizarre creatures, and a conjuring apparatus. The mountebank performs a comical dance and greets them in French and German, creating an amusing scene despite the continuous howling of his dog at the first sight of the girls. He offers them amulets to ward off the opio, claiming they work by pinning them to the pillow. Both Carmilla and Laura purchase one. He proceeds to show them his skills in dentistry, suggesting that Carmilla has a sharp pointed tooth that he could file down if it bothers her. Carmilla becomes visibly angered and withdraws from the window. She contemplates demanding redress from Laura's father, but her anger quickly subsides. Laura's father, upon returning home, reports another case similar to the recent fatal ones, involving a young peasant girl from their estate who is also slowly deteriorating. Carmilla expresses her fear of seeing supernatural things and her concerns about the disease spreading among the peasants. She questions whether everything in the world happens according to nature and suggests that nature is responsible for everything. Laura's father mentions that the doctor is arriving to discuss the situation. Carmilla hints at her past illness but avoids discussing it in detail, preferring not to dwell on the painful memories. Laura assures her that her father doesn't intend to frighten them. She becomes more affectionate and leads Laura away from her father's room. The conversation turns to fear, with Carmilla asking if Laura is afraid of dying. Laura admits to being afraid, and Carmilla assures her by embracing her affectionately. Carmilla talks about the idea of lovers dying together to live together eternally, comparing it to the transformation of caterpillars into butterflies. Later, the doctor visits and Laura overhears a conversation between him and her father. The doctor mentions mysterious aspects of life and death, leaving Laura curious about what they were discussing. A messenger arrives with 2 large packing cases containing old portraits that were being restored. The family gathers to witness the unpacking, and many of the pictures hold historical significance for Laura's Hungarian lineage. Among them, they find a particularly beautiful and striking portrait labeled Marcia Karnstein from 1698. The artist and the family are amazed by its lifelike appearance and its close resemblance to Carmilla. Laura asks to hang the picture in her room, and her father agrees. Carmilla appears enchanted by the portrait. Carmilla and Laura examine the portrait more closely and discover that the name inscribed is Mircala, Countess Karnstein, with the date 1698. Laura mentions her family's connection to the Karnsteins and the ruined castle nearby. Carmilla suggests going for a moonlit walk around the courtyard, reminiscent of the night she arrived. Laura agrees, and they walk together, with Carmilla asking if Laura is glad she came. She reassures her in remarks on Carmilla's romantic nature. Carmilla expresses that she has never been in love with anyone but might consider it with Laura. Then she becomes affectionate, whispering sweet words and declaring her love. However, she suddenly withdraws and appears weak, prompting concern from Laura. Carmilla reassures her that she is merely experiencing a brief weakness and promises to recover quickly. Laura suggests getting some wine, and Carmilla agrees. They enjoy a moment looking at the moonlight together, but Laura grows increasingly worried about Carmilla's health, fearing she might have fallen ill to a strange epidemic in the region. Carmilla insists that she's fine and that her weakness is temporary. As they return home, Carmilla seems better and engages in lively conversation. The evening proceeds without any further strange behavior from Carmilla. After their card game, Carmilla and the others sit down for coffee and chocolate. During this time, the conversation turns to Carmilla's mother, and she mentions that she hasn't heard from her. She expresses a desire to leave in search for her mother, but Laura's father insists that she must not leave, and they both must honor her mother's specific instructions. Carmilla thanks him for his hospitality and kind treatment and admits that she's been very happy at their chateau. Back in Carmilla's room, Laura asks if Carmilla will ever fully confide in her, to which Carmilla doesn't provide a direct answer but continues to smile warmly at her. As the evening progresses, tensions are rising due to the mysterious disease in the region, but for now, the chateau remains a safe and comfortable place for Carmilla. In a mysterious and somewhat unsettling conversation, she hints at a secret and of vows she took that prevents her from revealing her full story to Laura. She expresses intense emotions and warns Laura of her jealousy, emphasizing that love can be both selfish and consuming. Despite Laura's attempts to dismiss her talk as wild nonsense, Carmilla insists that the time is near when she will reveal everything. The conversation then shifts to a more light-hearted topic, with Carmilla asking if Laura has ever been to a ball. She reminisces about her own experience at a ball, but mentions that something traumatic happened that night, resulting in a wound to her chest that nearly took her life. She describes it as a cruel and strange love, suggesting that her life was sacrificed for it. As the discussion ends, Laura reflects on Carmilla's behavior, particularly her absence during family prayers and her apparent indifference to religion. She would have doubted her being a Christian had she not casually mentioned being baptized. Laura adopted Carmilla's habit of locking her bedroom door and searching her room for potential threats before going to bed. That night, Laura has a dream that feels like a nightmare, but it's different in the sense that she is aware that she is asleep. In the dream, she sees her room as it is, except for the darkness, and a black cat-like creature moving around the foot of her bed. The creature grows larger and moves faster until it becomes so dark that only its eyes are visible. It then jumps onto the bed and with its long fangs bites into Laura's chest. She wakes up screaming and sees the silhouette of a female figure standing at the foot of her bed, wearing a dark, loose dress with hair covering her shoulders. The figure is eerily still and doesn't appear to breathe. It then moves closer to the door, which opens and the figure exits. Laura was initially relieved when the strange episode ended, but she suspected that Carmilla might have been playing a prank on her, so she decided to check her bedroom door and found it secured from the inside. Terrified, she retreated to her bed, hid under the covers, and remained there in a state of fear and shock until morning. Laura couldn't bear to be alone. She considered telling her father but hesitated, fearing he might not take her seriously or worry about her health. Instead, she confided in her companions, Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine. Mademoiselle casually mentioned a haunted lime tree, but then laughed it off. Laura cautioned them not to mention the matter to Carmilla because her window overlooked the haunted lime tree walk and she might be easily frightened. Later that day, Carmilla shared her own fear of the previous night, recounting a terrifying dream from a dark figure she thought she saw near the chimney-piece. However, she believed her protective charm from the hunchback had saved him from a dreadful encounter similar to what had happened to the local villagers. Laura recounted her experiences to Carmilla, who expressed horror and recommended keeping the protective charm nearby. Although Laura was initially hesitant about sleeping alone again, she managed to do so on the following nights and even had a restful sleep. Carmilla explained that the charm was an antidote against maladies carried by the air, not evil spirits, and that it acted on the body rather than the mind. While the charm seemed to be effective in warding off any further incidents, Laura began to feel a persistent lassitude and melancholy, which was accompanied by strange thoughts of death and a sense of slowly sinking. Despite the sadness, this state of mind brought a certain sweetness to her life. But Laura continued to experience a strange illness marked by lassitude, melancholy, and disturbing dreams. Carmilla became increasingly devoted and affectionate during this time, which both fascinated and unsettled Laura. The early symptoms of the illness had a certain allure, but gradually a sense of horror crept in and darkened her life. As the illness progressed, Laura's dreams became more disturbing and disjointed, leaving her with a sense of exhaustion and fear upon waking. She also described strange sensations of touch and caresses, which culminated in convulsions and unconsciousness. Despite her deteriorating health and appearance, Laura stubbornly refused to admit her illness to her father, insisting that she was well. Laura's condition continued to deteriorate. Carmilla also experienced feverish dreams. One night, Laura heard a sweet yet terrible voice in her dream. "Your mother warns you to beware of the assassin." She woke up to find Carmilla standing nearby, drenched in blood. Then she promptly disappeared. Terrified, Laura ran out to the lobby and screamed for help, and Madame and Mademoiselle rushed out of their room in alarm. Her father was not able to be summoned due to his room being on the other end of the house, so far that the sound of the bell could not reach him. Servants came rushing and they all pounded at the locked door and shrieked Carmilla's name. Despite their frantic efforts, they couldn't get a response from her. Finally, they forced the door open and found the room empty. Carmilla had disappeared, leaving them in shock and fear. Carmilla was nowhere to be found in her room, and the search for her had begun to turn into a panic. The household members, including Laura's father, searched every part of the chateau and its grounds with no success. They were on the brink of desperation when, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Laura found Carmilla standing at her dressing table. She seemed extremely fearful and silent, and Laura, overjoyed by her return, embraced her and called for help to inform the others. However, instead of providing an immediate explanation, Carmilla hinted that the previous night had been a night of wonders, leaving the others in suspense and anxiety. Carmilla recounted her experience from the previous night, explaining that she had gone to sleep in her bed with the doors locked, but had woken up on the sofa in the dressing room. She found the door between the rooms open and the other door forced. Carmilla was perplexed about how this could have happened without her being awakened and without making any noise. Her story left everyone in the room puzzled and concerned. Laura's father, sensing the need for an explanation, asked if he could share his theory and pose a question to her, to which Carmilla dejectedly agreed to answer. After affirming that she did used to sleepwalk when young, he suggested that Carmilla might have walked in her sleep, explaining how she could have unlocked doors and moved around the house without waking up. He believes that this is the most natural and innocent explanation for her mysterious nighttime disappearance and reappearance. Carmilla seems relieved by this explanation, and they all agree that there is no need for alarm or fear. After the incident with Carmilla, they decided to have a servant sleep outside her door to prevent her from wandering. The next morning, a doctor arrived to see Laura. She recounted her story to him, and he became increasingly concerned. He had a private conversation with her father, which left him looking pale and agitated. The doctor asked Laura about the sensation she felt on her neck during the first strange dream. She described it as feeling like 2 needles piercing her skin. The doctor examined the area and found a small blue spot about the size of the tip of her little finger. She became frightened and asked if there was any danger. The doctor reassured her that she would recover and suggested that they take certain steps to address her condition, which he would explain later. He instructed Madame Perrodon not to leave Laura alone. The doctor also agreed to examine another patient, Carmilla, with similar symptoms later in the evening. Madame and Laura speculated on the reasons for the doctor's instructions, with Madame fearing a sudden seizure. Laura, on the other hand, thought it might be to prevent her from engaging in youthful activities. Her father received a letter from General Spielsdorf, who was expected to visit. But her father didn't seem pleased about it and had something on his mind that he didn't share. Laura asked if the doctor thought she was very ill. Her father reassured her that with the right steps she would recover in a day or 2, but wished that she had been well to receive the general. At noon, Laura, her father and Madame embarked on their planned journey. They crossed the drawbridge and followed the road to the west, leading to the deserted village and ruined castle of Constein. The road often meandered around the natural terrain, winding gracefully through valleys and along the steeper slopes of hills. During their drive, they encountered the general, who was accompanied by his servant and a wagon carrying his belongings. The general dismounted and joined them in the carriage, sending his horse ahead with his servants to Laura's castle. General Spielsdorf, who has not been seen for 10 months, had aged and become more somber. He expressed deep bitterness and anger about the death of his niece and ward, Bertha, blaming it on hellish arts. When asked to explain further, he hesitated, believing others won't believe his story. However, he eventually agreed to share his experiences, emphasizing that he had been led to believe in the supernatural due to the extraordinary evidence that contradicted his earlier beliefs. He felt he had been the victim of a preternatural conspiracy. In the midst of their conversation, the general expressed his intentions to explore the ruins of Constein, particularly the ruined chapel with its many tombs of the extinct family. Her father playfully suggested that perhaps the general was thinking of claiming the title and estates associated with the Consteins, but the general's demeanor turned serious and even fierce. He revealed that his purpose was quite different, to unearth some of the members of the Constein family. This revelation left her father looking more alarmed and intrigued than ever. The general acknowledged the desolation of the castle, the abandonment of the village, and the passage of time that had reduced everything associated with the Constein to ruins, but he explained that although the Constein family had been extinct for over a century, his own wife was maternally descended from the Consteins. He then began to recount the tragic story. The general began by expressing his niece's anticipation of the visit arranged for her with Laura. However, they received an invitation to attend a series of opulent festivities hosted by Count Karsfeld at his castle, located about 6 leagues from Constein, in honor of the Grand Duke Charles. The events at Count Karsfeld's estate were grand, featuring magnificent fireworks, enchanting music, and a dazzling masquerade. His niece Bertha, looking exceptionally beautiful without a mask, attracted the attention of a masked young lady who observed her intently. This mysterious woman was accompanied by another masked lady, elegantly dressed and exuding an air of authority. The companion engaged the general in conversation, revealing an inexplicable knowledge of his past. Meanwhile, the young lady, whom the lady called Milarka, converses with Bertha, and with her charm and witty conversations captivates them both. Milarka eventually lowers her mask, revealing her remarkably beautiful face. The general questions the elder lady and suggests she too remove her mask, to which she playfully refuses, teasing about the changes that come with years. The conversation is interrupted by a pale gentleman in black attire who requests to speak with the lady. She briefly steps away to converse with him, asking the general to hold her place in their conversation. The general contemplates joining his ward in conversation to gather more information. However, the lady returns with the pale man, who then informs her about her awaiting carriage, and the lady hints at her upcoming visit to the general's castle and reveals that they are old friends, though she can't disclose her identity yet. She urgently needs to travel on a mission but makes an audacious request: the general to take care of her daughter during her absence. Though taken aback and somewhat disarmed by her frankness, he ultimately agrees. Meanwhile, Bertha expresses a desire for her new friend Milarka to visit them. The mysterious lady emphasizes the need for secrecy and departs. Milarka expresses her desire to see her mother off from a window as she leaves, however, gets disheartened when her mother does not look up. The general theorized that she may have had taken off her mask. The ball continues until morning, and when they decide to leave, they realize that they've lost track of Milarka, and they search for her in vain, fearing she may have become lost in the vast castle grounds. They search for her, but find no trace of her. The next day, they received a message from Milarka, who had been looking for them in great distress. She explains her delay by saying she had fallen asleep in the housekeeper's room after being unable to find them. Relieved to have found her, they bring Milarka home with them, and the general is pleased to have her as a companion for his ward. Milarka, who has joined the general and her niece at their home, begins to exhibit signs of strange behavior. She complained of extreme fatigue and is occasionally seen wandering during the early morning hours, appearing as if in a trance. The general suspects that Milarka sleepwalks. However, a more urgent concern arises as his ward herself starts experiencing disturbing symptoms. Bertha starts being afflicted with terrifying dreams, senses a spectre or creature in her room, and feels sensations like the flow of an icy stream and a sharp pain in her throat. Eventually, she experiences a convulsive sense of strangulation and falls unconscious. As the general continues to recount these events, Laura realizes that the symptoms described are eerily similar to her own experiences with their guest, Carmilla. They arrive at the ruined village and castle of the Karnsteins. The general expresses his desire to explore the chapel and possibly locate the grave of Mircalla, Countess of Karnstein, who has been dead for more than a century. Laura's father offers to show him a portrait of the Countess, but the general hints that she may not be as dead as they think. He reveals his deep-seated anger and determination to seek vengeance on her by decapitating the monster, referring to Countess Mircalla. Laura's father is bewildered by his declaration. They arrange for a local ranger to guide them to the Karnstein family monuments. The woodman mentions that the village was deserted due to the revenants, which led to the deaths of many villagers before the creatures were dealt with using various methods, including decapitation and burning. He explained that even after numerous vampire graves were opened and the creatures were destroyed, the village remained haunted. A Moravian nobleman passing through the area offered to help. He climbed the chapel tower and observed the vampire leaving its grave, removing its linen wrappings and terrorizing the village. The Moravian lured the vampire to the tower's summit with its linen wrappings, where he killed it with his sword, beheaded it, and presented the head to the villagers for impalement and burning. He was also authorized to remove Countess Mircalla Karnstein's tomb, which he did, and its location was eventually forgotten. The forester, unable to provide its exact location, left. The general continued recounting his story. His beloved niece was growing worse, and despite the efforts of the physicians, her condition continued to deteriorate. He called in a second, more learned doctor from Graz, and they had a heated discussion about her illness. The doctor from Graz could not provide a solution and expressed his regrets. However, before leaving, he suggested that there might be one last chance to save her life if they could arrest a fatal seizure that was imminent. He hinted that the nature of this seizure was unusual and not caused by any natural disease. The general received a letter from the doctor in Graz. Despite the doctor's instruction to read the letter only in the presence of a priest, the general read it alone. In the letter, the doctor suggested that the girl might be suffering from the visits of a vampire and provided detailed descriptions of the vampire's marks and symptoms that matched the girl's condition. Skeptical of the supernatural explanation, the general concealed himself in a dark dressing room next to the girl's room with a sword by his side. He witnessed a large, black, ill-defined object crawling over the foot of the girl's bed and swelling into a palpitating mass at her throat while she was asleep. The general tried to attack the vampire Milarka, but failed. Milarka's victim ultimately succumbed to her condition and died. Laura's father walked a few distance away while the general brushed away his tears. Laura heard Carmilla and Madame's voices in the distance. Under a narrow archway, Laura sees Carmilla enter the chapel. The general suddenly attempted to fiercely attack her with a hatchet but was unsuccessful, and Carmilla vanished, leaving the general in a state of shock. The general and Madame search for her but cannot find her anywhere. He recognizes Carmilla as Milarka, Countess Karnstein, and urges Laura to leave the place immediately. He instructs her to go to the clergyman's house and warns her that she should never return as she won't find Carmilla here. Laura witnesses a strange-looking man enter the chapel where Carmilla disappeared. He is eccentric in appearance and mannerisms. The general is delighted to see him and introduces him to her father. The Baron examines the chapel using a plan and a book with notes. They discover a marble tablet that proves to be the long-lost monument of Mircalla, Countess of Karnstein. The three of them inspect the chapel thoroughly, measuring distances and examining the walls. They discover a marble tablet with a carved inscription that identifies it as the lost monument of Mircalla. The general expresses gratitude and relief, and it is mentioned that an inquisition will be held the next day. Laura's father speaks with the Baron privately, likely discussing Laura's case, while the general looks on with concern. Laura and her father decide to return home after their investigations in the chapel and plans to invite the local priest to the castle. Carmilla's whereabouts remain unknown, and Laura is left in the dark about the events in the chapel. That night, precautions are taken for Laura's safety, with servants and Madame staying in her room while the priest and her father keep watch in the dressing room. The disappearance of Carmilla coincides with the end of Laura's nightly suffering. The next day, formal proceedings take place in the chapel of Karnstein. The grave of Countess Mircalla is opened, revealing a remarkably well-preserved body. Medical experts confirm signs of life, including faint respiration and a beating heart. The vampire is staked through the heart, decapitated, and burned, ending the vampire's reign of terror in the region. Laura writes with great unease, her past horrors still haunting her. Baron Vordenberg, a scholar, had immersed himself in the study of vampirism, residing in Graz on a modest income while delving into a multitude of works on the subject. His extensive collection of books and documents related to vampirism allowed him to extract principles governing these creatures from various judicial cases. Laura emphasizes that, contrary to popular belief, vampires do not appear pale in life or when resting in their coffins. They maintain the appearance of health. Vampires have baffling abilities such as returning to their graves without disturbing anything. They sustain their undead existence by periodically sleeping in their graves and satisfying their insatiable thirst for living blood. They can become intensely fixated on a specific individual, using endless patience and cunning to reach their victims. Sometimes they prolong their murderous pursuits with a refined and gradual approach, as if seeking sympathy and consent. In other cases, they directly attack, often killing in a single brutal feast. They appear to be subject to unique conditions, like being bound to specific names, which may or may not be their true ones, as long as the letters in the name remain unchanged. Laura's father asked the Baron how he had found the hidden tomb of Countess Mircalla. The Baron, with a mysterious smile, explained that he possessed journals and papers from the Moravian nobleman, his ancestor. This man had been devastated by Mircalla's early death. He had discovered a grim truth about vampires. Suicides under certain conditions transform people into vampires, who then visit the living in their sleep, ultimately becoming vampires themselves in death. This fate befell the beautiful Mircalla, and he sought to prevent any posthumous execution of her remains, orchestrating a journey, a fake removal of her body, and a destruction of her monument. In his later years, the Baron's ancestor felt horror at what he had done, leaving behind notes and tracings to guide future generations to confront the vampire threat. The Baron shared that one sign of a vampire is the incredible strength of its hand. Mircalla's slender hand gripped the general's wrist like a vice when he tried to strike her with a hatchet, and it could leave a lasting numbness in the seized limb. After these harrowing events, Laura and her father traveled through Italy for over a year, attempting to recover from the lingering terror. To this day, Laura is haunted by memories of Carmilla, who alternately appears as the playful and beautiful girl, the writhing fiend in the ruined church, and even occasionally as a phantom, hearing her light footsteps at the drawing room door.